They declared the ship irrecoverable. Then a human restored it with a single wire. The alarm cut through the salvage station before I even opened my eyes. 3 short bursts, then a long one. The pattern we used only when something large was being pulled into dock without warning. I was on my feet before I finished thinking about it. Boots half-laced, coat still open, moving through the corridor while the lights strobed orange along the walls. By the time I reached the outer bay, half the night shift was already pressed against the viewing glass. Nobody was talking. That silence told me more than the alarm had. Our crews argued about everything: cargo manifests, fuel allocations, whose turn it was to file the damage reports. When they went quiet like this, it meant something out there had scared them. I pushed through until I could see the dock myself, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. The ship hanging in the capture field was enormous, easily 3 times the length of anything we had processed that year, and it was wrong in ways I could not immediately name. Its hull was scorched black along one entire flank, streaked with long claw-like burns that curled around the frame as if something had tried to peel it open and failed. Half its running lights were dead. The other half flickered in no pattern I recognized. Not damage, not a system fault, something closer to a heartbeat struggling to find its rhythm. It was a human warship. We did not see many of those out here, not intact, not close enough to study. Most of what drifted through Coalition salvage lanes came from smaller trade vessels, transport haulers, the occasional patrol craft that had wandered too far and paid for it. A human warship this size, this badly wounded, and still holding together, was rare enough that every engineer on the station had a theory about what happened to it before it even finished docking. Commander Doran arrived a few minutes later, still fastening the collar of his uniform, his expression tight in the way it only got when he suspected paperwork was about to become the least of his problems. "Status," he said, not looking at any of us in particular. "Drive core is dark," said Petra Lund, one of the senior technicians, reading from a scanner slate with her jaw clenched. "Life support signature is non-existent. No response to hail, no response to automated docking protocol. We only got it into the field because the tow drones locked onto the hull directly. Survivors? Unknown. Internal scans are returning nothing. Either everyone aboard is gone, or the ship is blocking us from seeing inside. And honestly, Commander, at this point I am not sure which answer worries me more." Doran exhaled slowly through his nose. "Get engineering down there. I want eyes on that hull before we open a single hatch." That order landed on me, because it always landed on me. I had spent 11 years on this station, more than half my adult life, taking apart wrecks that other people were too frightened or too impatient to understand. I had learned to read a damaged ship the way some people read faces. The burn patterns telling me where the fighting had been worst. The buckled plating telling me how the pilot had tried, and mostly failed, to keep the vessel alive. Nothing about this ship made sense to me, and that alone was enough to make my hands unsteady as I suited up. Petra walked with me to the airlock, running through what little data we had. "Whoever built this thing wanted it to survive things that should not be survivable," she said. "Look at the frame reinforcement. That is not standard human military design, not from anything we have cataloged. It is heavier, almost stubborn." Stubborn is a strange word for a hull plate. You will understand what I mean once you are inside. She was right, though I did not appreciate it until I stepped through the outer hatch myself, into a corridor lit only by the beam of my own hand lamp. The air inside was thin, but breathable, which was already strange, because every diagnostic marker on the exterior suggested total system failure. A ship with a dead life support core did not usually leave breathable air behind. Something, somewhere, was still fighting to keep this vessel from becoming a tomb. I moved deeper, past dead consoles and dark corridors, my lamp catching scorch marks on the walls that told a story of fire fought, and eventually smothered, rather than a fire that had simply been allowed to burn itself out. Someone aboard this ship had worked, right up until the very end, to keep it from dying completely. The command deck, when I finally reached it, was empty. No bodies, no signs of a crew abandoning ship in panic, no evidence of an evacuation at all. Just silence, and consoles gone completely black, and one single chair turned slightly toward the main terminal, as if whoever had been sitting there had simply vanished mid-task. I stood there longer than I should have, feeling the particular kind of unease that comes from being somewhere a person clearly meant to return to, and never did. Back on the station, my report joined 3 others, all reaching the same conclusion, through different methods. The ship's core reactor had suffered what our systems classified as catastrophic cascade failure, the kind of damage that did not simply disable a vessel, but unraveled its ability to be repaired at all. Every diagnostic array we owned, 3 separate systems built by 3 separate engineering guilds with 3 separate philosophies, agreed on the same verdict. The ship was gone, not damaged, gone, a total loss, fit only for parts. Doran signed the order to begin stripping it within the day, his voice flat, as he read the classification aloud during the morning briefing. Total system failure, confirmed by triple diagnostic consensus. Vessel designation Solace is hereby classified non-recoverable. Salvage teams may begin extraction of remaining components. I remember feeling something close to grief when he said that, which surprised me, because I did not know this ship, did not know its crew, had no reason to feel anything toward a hunk of scorched metal that had drifted into our dock uninvited. But there had been something in that empty command chair, something in the way the corridors still smelled faintly of scorched wiring rather than decay, that made the word non-recoverable feel premature. I kept that feeling to myself. Engineers who argue with triple diagnostic consensus do not stay engineers for long. The stripping crews were assembling equipment 2 days later when the contractor arrived. I did not see him come aboard the station. I only became aware of him because Petra found me in the parts bay, arms full of salvage tags, an odd expression on her face that I had never seen her wear before. "There is a human in the observation deck," she said, standing at the glass, looking at the Solace. "He is not on any crew manifest. He is not on any visitor registry. Security says he simply walked in through the civilian dock and asked to see the wreck before anyone touches it. And they let him? He has clearance. Coalition-level clearance, the kind that makes station security very quiet and very polite, very quickly. Doran is already down there." Curiosity got the better of caution, and I followed her toward the observation deck, telling myself the entire way that I only wanted to see how Doran handled an uninvited visitor with unexplained authority. That was not entirely true. Some part of me wanted to see what kind of person walked onto a salvage station and asked to look at a ship everyone else had already given up on. He did not look like much. That was my first honest thought, and I still remember feeling almost embarrassed by it. I do not know exactly what I expected from a human with clearance high enough to unsettle station security, but it was not this. He was of average height, dressed in a plain dark jacket with no insignia, no rank markings, nothing that separated him from any transport worker you might pass in a corridor without a second glance. His hair was the kind of nondescript brown that photographs poorly. His hands, when he finally turned to acknowledge Doran, were rough in the particular way that came from actual work rather than simulated training exercises. "Daniel Hart," he said, offering nothing further. No title, no organization, no explanation for why he was standing in our observation deck at all. Doran's tone carried the careful edge of someone speaking to an unknown quantity. "This is a restricted salvage operation, Mr. Hart. I was told you have clearance, but I was not told why." I heard about the ship. Hart's eyes had not left the glass since we arrived, fixed on the scorched hull hanging silently beyond it. "I wanted to see it before your team started taking it apart. The vessel has been classified non-recoverable. Triple diagnostic consensus. There is very little left to see." That was when Hart said something that I would replay in my mind many times over the following days, something that struck me as strange in the moment, and would come to feel far stranger later. "Diagnostics tell you what a system reports about itself," he said quietly. "They do not always tell you what actually happened." Doran did not have a response ready for that, and honestly, neither did I. It was such an odd thing to say, almost philosophical, the kind of statement that sounded like it belonged in a training manual, rather than a conversation about scorched hull plating. "With respect," Doran said eventually, "our diagnostic systems have a 400-year record of accuracy across 3 engineering guilds. I understand you may have your own methods, Mr. Hart, but this is not a matter of opinion." Hart finally turned away from the glass to look at him, and there was something in his expression that I struggled to place at the time. Not arrogance exactly, not the confidence of someone who believed he knew better simply because he wished it to be true. It looked more like patience, the kind a person carries when they have had this exact conversation before, many times, in many places, and have simply learned not to argue about it before being given the chance to prove otherwise. "I would like an hour aboard the ship," he said, "before your crews begin extraction." "For what purpose?" "To look." Doran glanced toward me, an unspoken question in his eyes, the kind he only asked when he wanted an engineer's opinion, before making a decision he did not fully trust. I did not know what to tell him. Everything in my training said this request was pointless, that a single unaccompanied hour would change nothing about a verdict reached by 3 independent diagnostic systems. But I kept thinking about that empty command chair, turned slightly toward the terminal, and the strange, stubborn, breathable air that should not have existed. "It costs us nothing to let him look," I said finally. "The stripping schedule does not begin until tomorrow regardless." Doran considered this longer than I expected, then nodded once, sharp and final. "1 hour, Mr. Hart. Escorted. I want an engineer with you at all times, and I want a full report of anything you touch." "That's fine," Hart said. Then his eyes moved to me, and something in his expression shifted, curiosity replacing patience. "Are you the one who went in first?" I filed the initial report. "Yes." "Then you're the one I want with me." I did not know, standing there in that observation deck with the wreck of the Solace hanging silent and scorched beyond the glass, that this conversation would become the first thread of something far larger, something that would eventually reach every corner of Coalition space, and change the way an entire galaxy thought about the word irrecoverable. I only knew, in that moment, that I was curious, and a little unsettled, and that some quiet part of me wanted to see what a man with rough hands and no insignia thought he could find in a ship that 400 years of engineering wisdom had already condemned. We suited up together in near silence. Hart moved through the equipment checks with the ease of someone who had done this many times before, checking seals, testing his lamp, running his fingers along the edge of his tool belt as if counting items he already knew were there. He carried almost nothing with him. No diagnostic scanner, no repair kit heavier than what would fit on a single strap across his shoulder, nothing that suggested he expected to actually fix anything. "You do not seem prepared to repair a warship," I said, unable to keep the observation to myself. "I'm not going in to repair it," he said. "Not yet. I'm going in to listen to it." "Ships do not talk, Mr. Hart." He smiled slightly at that, the first real expression I had seen cross his face since he arrived. "Everything talks," he said. "Most people just stop listening the moment something official tells them there is nothing left to hear." The airlock hissed open in front of us, and the corridor beyond swallowed the light from the station behind, leaving only the twin beams of our lamps cutting through the dark. I had walked this same path 2 days earlier, alone, filing a report that would help condemn this ship to the breaker's yard. Walking it again now, beside a man who refused to accept that verdict, felt like stepping into an entirely different vessel, one I had not actually seen the first time at all. Neither of us spoke as we moved deeper, past the scorched walls, past the dead consoles, past every sign of a crew that had fought until the very last possible moment to keep something alive. Hart's steps slowed near sections that mine had passed without a second glance, his gloved hand occasionally resting against a bulkhead, as if feeling for something beneath the metal that no instrument could measure. When we finally reached the command deck, he stopped in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the same empty chair I had stood before 2 days earlier, turned slightly toward the terminal, waiting for someone who was never coming back to finish whatever they had started. "Someone was still working," he said quietly, almost to himself, "right up until the end." That was my assessment as well. "Then the question isn't whether this ship failed." He stepped inside, moving toward the terminal, with slow, deliberate care. "The question is what it was protecting itself from when it did." I did not understand what he meant by that, not then, standing in the cold dark of a command deck that every instrument on our station insisted was nothing more than the corpse of a machine. I only knew that something about the way he said it made the silence around us feel different, less like an ending, and more like the space just before a question finally gets answered. Behind us, the corridor stretched back toward the airlock, back toward Doran and Petra, and the stripping crews waiting for tomorrow's schedule to begin. Ahead of us, in the dark, Daniel Hart knelt beside a dead terminal and began, very quietly, to trace his fingers along a bundle of burned wiring that every diagnostic system in Coalition space had already declared beyond saving. I did not know it yet, but I was about to watch the first thread of that verdict come undone. Hart did not move for a long moment, crouched beside the dead terminal with his fingers resting lightly against the burned wiring, as if he were reading something written in a language only his hands understood. I stood behind him, lamp raised, watching his breath fog faintly against the inside of his visor, and I found myself holding still, the way you hold still around something you do not fully understand yet. "Talk to me," I said finally. "What are you looking for?" "Not looking." His voice was low, almost distracted.
"Listening."
"There's a difference. You said that before. I still do not understand what it means." He glanced back at me then, and for the first time since we had met in the observation deck, something like genuine warmth crossed his expression, the look of a person deciding whether a stranger was worth explaining something to. Whatever he saw in my face satisfied him, because he turned back to the wiring and began to speak, slowly, choosing his words with the same careful precision he used with his hands. "When a system fails," he said, "there are two kinds of silence. The first kind means the system is actually dead. Circuits burned through, components physically destroyed, nothing left to carry a signal even if you wanted it to. That silence has a texture to it. It feels final. And the second kind? The second kind is a system choosing not to answer." He tapped one gloved finger against a small black relay housing, no larger than my palm, half melted along one edge. "This looks the same to every scanner we have. Same thermal signature, same electrical dead end, same total absence of response. But it isn't the same, not if you know what you're feeling for." I crouched beside him, curious despite myself, though I kept my voice skeptical, because skepticism was the only thing standing between me and looking foolish in front of a man who had walked onto our station with no rank and an inexplicable amount of authority. "Our diagnostic AIs measure exactly what you just described. Thermal signature, electrical continuity, structural integrity. If those systems say a component is dead, it is dead. That is not a matter of feeling. Your diagnostic AIs are built to ask one question," Hart said. "Is this component functioning as designed?" And when the answer comes back no, they stop asking anything else. But there's a second question worth asking, one your systems were never built to consider. Is this component functioning as designed because it's broken, or because it was told to stop? That single sentence sat in the cold air between us for a long moment, and I felt something shift in my understanding of the ship around us, though I could not yet say exactly what. "You believe this vessel shut itself down deliberately?" "I think it's possible." He rose to his feet, moving toward a bundle of thicker cabling that ran along the base of the command console, tracing it with his eyes rather than his hands this time. "Human warships built for deep patrol duty carry defensive protocols most people never hear about, because most people never need to. If a vessel is boarded by hostile forces, or captured, or left drifting somewhere it should not be found, it has options beyond simply exploding or surrendering its systems intact. Options, such as pretending to be dead. Convincingly dead, he said. Dead enough that anyone without the right knowledge would give up and start stripping it for parts within a day of finding it. His eyes flicked toward me, and there was no accusation in them, only a quiet, patient honesty. Which is exactly what was scheduled to happen here. I did not know how to respond to that. Every instinct trained into me over 11 years told me this was speculation dressed up as expertise, the kind of story a person tells when they want permission to do something no proper diagnostic would allow. And yet I could not stop thinking about the empty command chair, the breathable air that should not have existed, the scorch marks that told a story of fire fought, rather than fire simply left to burn. If you are right, I said slowly, why would a ship protect itself from its own rescuers? We are not hostile. We are a salvage operation, nothing more. You're not hostile, Hart agreed. But the ship doesn't know that. It only knows what it was told to watch for before whatever happened to it happened. And once a system like this locks itself down, it doesn't reopen for just anyone who asks nicely. He crouched again beside the melted relay, studying it with narrowed eyes. It reopens for someone who knows exactly what question to ask, and exactly how to ask it. And you believe you know that question? I believe I know where to start. He reached into the small bag slung across his shoulder and withdrew a coil of thin wire, unremarkable in every way, the kind of basic conductive filament that existed in every engineering kit across Coalition space. I had expected something more, some specialized tool built for exactly this purpose, some piece of human technology our scanners had simply failed to register. Instead, he held nothing more than a length of ordinary wire, turning it slowly between his fingers as he studied the melted relay in front of him. "That is it," I said, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. "That is your solution, a piece of wire." "Sometimes the most complicated problems have the simplest fixes," Hart said, not looking up. "People forget that when they spend too much time trusting machines to tell them what's actually happening." "Our diagnostic AIs are not simply machines, Mr. Hart. They represent 4 centuries of accumulated engineering knowledge across 3 separate guilds, each verifying the other's conclusions independently. That is not something to be dismissed because a piece of wire feels more elegant to you." He looked up at that, and though his expression remained calm, there was something sharper beneath it now, something that suggested I had touched a nerve he did not often let show. "I'm not dismissing 4 centuries of engineering knowledge," he said. "I'm telling you that knowledge was never built to recognize a system that's lying to it on purpose. Your diagnostics are honest tools. They report what they measure. But they were never designed to imagine that the thing they're measuring might be deliberately hiding what it actually is." "That sounds like a very convenient excuse for why your methods disagree with ours." "Maybe." He turned back to the relay. "Or maybe it's just history. Humans have spent a long time learning not to trust the first answer we're given, especially the answer that something is beyond saving. We learned that the hard way, more than once, in circumstances I'd rather not describe to someone who's never lived through them." Something in his voice, quiet and worn, in a way his earlier confidence had not been, told me this was not simply professional opinion. It was memory, carried the way certain memories are carried, folded small and kept close, brought out only when circumstances demanded it. I did not ask him to explain further. Some instinct told me he would not have answered even if I had. I watched instead as he began to work, his movements unhurried despite the ticking clock of our allotted hour, tracing the burned relay housing with careful attention, before selecting a point along its edge, where the melted casing had pulled slightly away from the metal beneath. He did not attempt to repair the relay itself. That much was clear from the way he ignored it entirely, focusing instead on the cluster of secondary pathways branching away from it, each one dead according to every scanner reading I had taken 2 days earlier. "You are not fixing the fault," I said, watching him strip a small section of insulation from one end of the wire, with practiced efficiency. "You are going around it." "That's exactly what I'm doing." "Why?" "If the fault is the source of the failure, surely repairing it directly would be the more logical approach." "Because I don't think the fault is actually broken," he said. "I think it's doing its job perfectly. It's supposed to look burned out. It's supposed to convince anyone who checks that there's nothing left to save here. If I go in and try to repair something that was never actually damaged, I'll just be fighting a system that's specifically designed to resist exactly that kind of interference. And routing around it will not trigger the same resistance? Maybe it will." He glanced up at me, and there was something almost rueful in his expression, the honesty of a man who did not pretend to certainty he did not actually possess. "I don't know for sure." Nobody ever knows for sure with something like this. Not until you try it and see what happens. That's the part people struggle with the most, I think. Everyone wants a guarantee before they're willing to attempt something difficult, but some problems don't offer guarantees. They only offer a chance, and the choice of whether you're willing to take it. I thought of Doran, waiting above us on the station, of the stripping crews already preparing their equipment for tomorrow, of 3 separate diagnostic AIs, whose combined verdict represented 400 years of accumulated certainty. I thought of the empty command chair behind us, turned slightly toward a terminal that someone had never finished working at, and I thought about how easily that person's efforts would be erased the moment the breaker's yard finished its work. "How long will this take?" I asked. "If you are right." "Not long. Minutes, maybe, once I find the correct pathway." He returned his attention to the wire, beginning to trace a careful route along the underside of the console, avoiding the melted relay entirely. connecting points that no schematic I had ever studied suggested should be connected at all. The hard part isn't the work itself. The hard part is figuring out which question the ship is actually waiting to be asked. And if you ask the wrong question? He paused, just for a moment, his hands going still above the console. Then nothing happens, he said. The ship stays quiet, your crews strip it for parts tomorrow, exactly as scheduled, and I go back to wherever I came from, having wasted your hour and mine. He resumed his work, unhurried, as if the possibility of failure did not particularly trouble him. But I don't think that's what's going to happen here. You sound very confident for someone working with nothing more than a piece of wire and a guess. It's not a guess. He said it quietly, without arrogance, simply stating something he believed to be true. It's a pattern. I've seen it before, in other places, other ships, other systems that everyone else had already given up on. The pattern doesn't always look the same on the surface, but underneath, it's usually the same story. Something built to survive being left for dead, doing exactly what it was designed to do, waiting for someone who knows enough to stop believing the first answer they were given. I did not respond to that, because I did not know how. Everything about this conversation sat uncomfortably against everything I had been trained to trust, and yet some part of me, the same part that had felt grief standing in this very room 2 days earlier, wanted very badly for him to be right. Above us, somewhere beyond the dark corridors and the cold silence of the command deck, the station continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware that a man with rough hands and a length of ordinary wire was quietly working to prove 4 centuries of accumulated engineering wrong. I stood beside him in the dark, lamp raised, and waited to see what would happen when he finally finished tracing the pathway he had chosen, half convinced I was witnessing something extraordinary, and half convinced I was simply watching a stranger waste both our time on a theory built from nothing more than memory and stubbornness. Either way, I found I could not look away. The comm unit in my collar buzzed 20 minutes into our allotted hour, and Doran's voice came through clipped and impatient, the tone of a man who had already spent too much of his morning on something he considered a formality. Status report. What is he doing down there? I glanced at Hart, still crouched over the console, his hands moving with the same unhurried precision he had shown since we began. Tracing an alternate pathway around the primary relay fault, I said into the comm. No damage to existing systems. No breach of protocol. That is not an answer, Voss. Is he making progress or is he wasting our schedule? I hesitated, because I honestly did not know how to answer that question in a way that would satisfy him. He believes he is close to something. I cannot verify that independently. There was a pause on the other end, the particular kind of silence that meant Doran was weighing the cost of pulling us out immediately against the cost of allowing a civilian contractor 40 more minutes aboard a ship his own crews were scheduled to begin dismantling tomorrow. 40 minutes, he said finally. Then I want both of you back through that airlock, regardless of what he has or has not found. Petra is monitoring external readings from the observation deck, any anomaly, any spike in the ship's residual power signature, and I am pulling you out early. Am I understood? Understood. The comm went dead, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. Hart glanced up briefly, unbothered by the exchange, then returned his attention to the wire in his hands. He's worried, he said, more observation than question. He is responsible for this station, and everyone on it. Worry is a reasonable position. I didn't say it wasn't. He guided the stripped end of the wire beneath a small housing near the base of the console, working with the careful patience of someone assembling something far more delicate than its appearance suggested. I just meant he's not wrong to be worried. This is not a small thing we're doing. You said earlier that if you were wrong, nothing would happen. That's true for the ship. He did not look up. It's not necessarily true for the people standing near it while I try. That admission settled uneasily in my chest, and I found myself glancing toward the corridor behind us, toward the distant airlock and the station beyond it, calculating how quickly we could retreat if whatever Hart was attempting went wrong in a way neither of us anticipated. You did not mention that possibility before. You didn't ask. He said it without malice, simply stating a fact. I'm not trying to frighten you. I genuinely don't think this will go badly, but I've learned not to promise certainty I don't have, especially to someone who's trusting me with their safety as much as their curiosity right now. I appreciated the honesty. even as it unsettled me further, and I found myself watching his hands with renewed attention, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt that might tell me whether his confidence was genuine or simply well-practiced. I found none. Whatever fear he carried about this attempt, he kept it entirely separate from the steadiness of his hands. Petra's voice crackled through the comm a few minutes later, sharper than Doran's had been. "Elena, I am reading a fluctuation in the ship's residual power signature. Small, localized, consistent with your position on the command deck. Confirm status." I glanced at Hart, who had gone very still, his eyes fixed on a small section of the console where a single indicator light, previously dark, now glowed faint amber against the surrounding gloom. "Confirmed," I said into the comm, my voice steadier than I felt. "A single indicator has activated near our position. No other systems responding yet. Doran wants to know if that constitutes an anomaly, requiring immediate extraction." Hart shook his head slightly, not looking away from the light. "Tell them not yet," he said quietly. "Tell them we're close." I relayed the message, feeling the weight of what I was doing settle over me fully for the first time. I was standing in the dark heart of a ship that 4 centuries of engineering consensus had declared beyond saving, watching a man with no official rank and a single length of wire coax the faintest possible sign of life from a system everyone else had already buried, and I was choosing, in that moment, to trust his judgment over the layered certainty of my own training. "Talk to me about what you're seeing," I said, needing something to fill the silence, needing to understand what was happening, even if I could not fully explain why it mattered so much to me now. "This light," Hart said, gesturing toward the faint amber glow, "isn't part of any system your scanners cataloged as functional. It's an internal status indicator, buried deep in the ship's core architecture. The kind of thing that only activates when a very specific set of conditions has been met." He glanced at me. "It means the ship is listening, not responding yet, just listening, the way you'd hold still and pay attention to a sound you weren't sure you actually heard." "Listening for what?" "Confirmation," he said, "that whoever is standing here asking these questions actually knows what they're doing, that we're not simply hostile forces trying to force our way through a locked door. And if it decides we do not meet that standard, then the light goes out, the pathway closes, and we go back to being exactly as unwelcome as we were an hour ago." He returned his attention to the console, adjusting the wire's connection point by the smallest possible margin, his brow furrowed in concentration. "But I don't think that's going to happen, not with how far we've already gotten." The comm buzzed again, Doran's voice this time, tighter than before. "20 minutes remaining, Voss. Petra is telling me your anomaly reading has not resolved itself. I want an update, and I want it now." "The ship is responding to Hart's work," I said, choosing my words carefully, aware of how strange they sounded even as I spoke them, slowly, deliberately. "There is no indication of hostile activity." "There is no precedent for what you are describing," Doran said. "Every diagnostic system we own has confirmed this vessel is beyond recovery. If what you are telling me is accurate, that consensus is wrong, and I need you to understand how significant that possibility actually is, before either of you takes another step forward." I understood exactly how significant it was, more than Doran likely realized in that moment, because I was the one standing in the dark watching a single amber light flicker against a console that had been silent for 2 days, feeling the weight of everything I had been trained to trust shift beneath my feet, like ground giving way beneath a structure that had always seemed solid. "I understand," I said. "We will proceed carefully." Hart glanced at me after the comm fell silent again, something unreadable in his expression. "You didn't have to defend what I'm doing to your commander," he said. "You could have told him this was too uncertain, pulled us both out, let your crews strip the ship tomorrow exactly as planned. Nobody would have questioned that decision." "I could have," I agreed. "I am not entirely certain why I did not." "Curiosity," he said, a faint smile touching the corner of his mouth. "It's a dangerous thing, in my experience. Gets people into all sorts of situations they never planned on." "Is that meant to reassure me?" "Not particularly." He turned back to the console, his expression settling into focused concentration once more. "But it's honest, and I figure you'd rather have honest than reassuring, given everything you've put up with from me so far." He was right about that, more right than I wanted to admit. and I said nothing further as he made the final adjustments to the wire's placement, his movements slowing now, each motion deliberate and precise, in a way that told me we were approaching whatever moment this entire hour had been building toward. The amber light pulsed steadily against the dark console, and somewhere beneath the dead metal surrounding us, I thought I could feel something else stirring, faint and uncertain, like breath held too long finally beginning to release. 15 minutes, Hart murmured, more to himself than to me, studying the wire's connection with narrowed eyes. That should be enough. Enough for what? He did not answer immediately, his attention entirely consumed by the delicate work in front of him, and I found myself holding my own breath without quite meaning to, watching the faint amber glow pulse against the darkness, waiting to see whether the next few minutes would prove him a genius, a fool, or something far stranger than either. Enough, he finally said, to find out whether I'm right. The comm crackled once more, Petra's voice edged with something I had not heard from her before, not quite alarm, but close to it. Elena, the fluctuation is spreading. It is no longer localized to your position. I am reading power signatures moving through secondary systems across multiple decks. Whatever is happening, it is not staying contained to the command deck anymore. Hart's hands went still above the console, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw something flicker across his face that looked distinctly like uncertainty. That's faster than I expected, he said quietly. I felt my chest tighten. Is that a problem? He did not answer right away, his eyes fixed on the amber light, now joined by a second indicator flickering to life beside it, and then a third, spreading slowly across the console like something waking up piece by piece after a very long sleep. I don't know yet, he said finally. Let's find out together. The console lights kept spreading, one indicator after another blinking awake in a slow cascading pattern that moved outward from the point where Hart's wire connected to the buried pathway beneath the housing. I watched it happen with a strange mixture of fear and fascination, unable to decide whether I was witnessing the birth of something remarkable or the first stage of a mistake neither of us would be able to undo. Talk to me, I said again, my voice tighter now than it had been minutes earlier. What is happening? The ship is waking up its own diagnostic layer, Hart said, his eyes tracking the spreading lights with intense concentration. Not the systems your scanners were reading before. A deeper layer, one built specifically to stay hidden from outside inspection. It's checking itself, running through every subsystem in sequence, trying to determine how much damage actually happened and how much was self-imposed. Is that dangerous? It shouldn't be. Not to us. He paused, and something in that pause told me he was choosing his next words carefully. It could be dangerous to the ship if the process gets interrupted partway through. A system this deeply guarded doesn't like being woken up halfway and then abandoned. If we pull out now, there's a chance it locks down again, permanently this time, in a way I wouldn't be able to reopen no matter what I tried. The comm crackled before I could respond. 10 minutes, Doran said, his voice carrying an edge of command that left no room for negotiation. Petra is telling me the power signature is now visible across nearly a third of the vessel. I am not willing to let this continue unsupervised much longer, Voss. I need you to give me a reason to trust what is happening down there, or I am ordering immediate extraction. I looked at Hart, and he looked back at me, and in that brief exchange I understood that the decision resting on my next words carried more weight than almost anything I had ever reported during 11 years on this station. The process appears to be self-contained, I said into the comm, choosing honesty over false confidence, because I suspected Doran would see through anything less. Hart believes interrupting it now could cause permanent damage to whatever recovery is currently underway. I cannot independently verify that claim, but nothing we have observed so far suggests hostile intent. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I began to fear Doran had already made his decision without telling me. When his voice finally returned, it was quieter, more measured, the sound of a commander weighing consequences he did not fully understand. You have 10 minutes, he said, not a second longer. If anything changes, if there is any indication this is spreading beyond what your contractor claims to be controlling, I am initiating emergency lockdown on that section of the ship, with both of you inside it if necessary. Do you understand what I am telling you? I understand. The comm fell silent, and I turned back to find Hart already working again, his hands steady, despite the pressure now bearing down on both of us from every direction. The lights across the console had stopped their cascading spread and settled into a slow, rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing, and beneath my boots, I thought I could feel the faintest vibration running through the deck plating, something that had not been there when we first entered. "The floor," I said. "Do you feel that?" Secondary power distribution coming online. Hart did not look up, his focus entirely consumed by a small panel that had slid open beneath the console, revealing a cluster of components I did not recognize from any schematic I had studied. "The ship is redirecting stored reserves toward its core systems. It's not enough to bring the reactor back online, not yet, but it's enough to start testing whether the pathways I opened are actually trustworthy." Testing them how? By seeing what happens when it lets a small amount of power flow through them. He reached into the open panel, his movements slow and deliberate, and made one final adjustment that I could not follow with my eyes. Something too small and too precise for me to track in the dim light. "This is the part where we find out if I read the pattern correctly." For a long moment, nothing happened. The console lights continued their steady pulse. The faint vibration beneath our boots remained unchanged, and I found myself counting seconds in my head, watching Hart's face for any sign of doubt or fear that might tell me whether we had reached the moment of success or the moment just before failure. His expression gave nothing away. He simply watched the panel, waiting, the same patient stillness I imagined he carried into every uncertain situation he had ever faced. 9 minutes, came Doran's voice through the comm, clipped and tense. "Voss, I need a status update." I opened my mouth to respond, and that was the exact moment everything changed. A low hum rolled through the command deck, rising from somewhere deep beneath the floor plating, quiet at first, and then steadily growing until I could feel it in my chest, as much as hear it, through the thin atmosphere of my suit. The console in front of us flared to life all at once. Dozens of previously dark screens flickering through startup sequences I had never seen a human vessel display. Symbols and readouts cascading faster than my eyes could follow. "It's happening," Hart breathed, and for the first time since I had met him, I heard something in his voice that sounded almost like disbelief, as though even he had not fully allowed himself to expect this moment would actually arrive. Overhead, the corridor lights we had walked through in darkness began to flicker on, section by section, spreading away from the command deck like a wave rolling outward through the ship's dead arteries, waking one system after another from a sleep that 4 centuries of accumulated engineering wisdom had declared permanent. Somewhere far below us, a low mechanical groan echoed through the hull, the sound of something massive and long dormant beginning, slowly and painfully, to stir. "Report," Doran's voice cracked through the comm, sharp with alarm now. "Petra is reading a massive spike in power signature across the entire vessel." "I need to know exactly what is happening down there. Right now." I stared at the console in front of me, at the cascading lights and the steadily rising hum, and the impossible, undeniable evidence that something 400 years of diagnostic consensus had declared beyond saving was, in this very moment, coming back to life beneath our feet. "The ship," I said, my voice barely steady enough to form the words, "is waking up." The comm exploded with overlapping voices the moment I finished speaking, Doran shouting orders to someone off-channel, Petra's voice cutting through with rapid readings of power curves climbing faster than any of us had prepared for. Through the deck plating beneath my boots, the low mechanical groan deepened into something closer to a heartbeat, steady and growing stronger, spreading outward through the hull like the ship was remembering, piece by piece, what it had once been built to do. "Voss, get out of there!" Doran's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with command. "I am initiating emergency lockdown on that section immediately. I want both of you back through the airlock before I seal it." I looked at Hart, still crouched beside the now brightly lit console, watching the cascading readouts with an expression that held none of the alarm, coloring every voice on the comm channel. "Did you hear that?" I said. "Doran is sealing the section." I heard. Hart did not move, his eyes tracking something on the screen in front of him with focused intensity. "Tell him to wait. This isn't hostile. Look at the pattern. It's stabilizing, not escalating." He cannot see the pattern, Hart. He can only see a warship that was declared dead 2 days ago, suddenly drawing more power than half this station combined. From where he is standing, This looks exactly like the beginning of a catastrophe. Then help him see it differently. Hart finally looked up at me, something urgent in his expression now. The first real crack in his steady composure since we had come aboard. If he locks this section down mid-sequence, the same thing I warned you about earlier happens, except worse. The ship isn't just failing to wake up. It's being cut off in the middle of trying, which could damage systems that are only now starting to stabilize. We need more time, not less. I relayed his warning into the comm, my voice steadier than I felt, and heard Doran's frustrated exhale on the other end. You are asking me to trust a civilian contractor's judgment over a station-wide emergency protocol built specifically for situations exactly like this one. I am asking you to trust what we are both witnessing, I said. Nothing about this reads as an attack, Commander. The power signature is climbing, yes, but it is climbing in a controlled, deliberate pattern. If this ship intended harm, it has had every opportunity to act against us in the last 10 minutes, and has not done so. The silence that followed felt longer than it likely was, Doran weighing a decision that would either validate an impossible claim or condemn two of his people to whatever consequences an uncontrolled warship reactivation might bring. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost some of its sharp edge, replaced by something more careful, more calculating. 5 minutes, he said. I am holding the lockdown for 5 minutes, and I am moving all non-essential personnel away from the dock in the meantime. If that power curve so much as twitches toward instability, I am sealing that section immediately, and I will not wait for either of you to clear it first. Am I understood? Understood. Beside me, Hart had already returned his full attention to the console, his hands moving with renewed urgency, now that the clock had been given a hard limit. The readouts in front of him shifted through what looked like an internal inventory, section after section of the ship reporting its own status in rapid succession, systems that had been silent for 2 entire days, suddenly finding their voice all at once. There, Hart said suddenly, pointing toward a cluster of symbols near the bottom of the display. That's what I was hoping to see. What is it? Recognition. Confirmation. He exhaled, and for the first time since the console had come alive, something like genuine relief crossed his face. The ship just verified that the pathway I opened wasn't a hostile intrusion attempt. It's classifying our presence as authorized, which means it's going to keep stabilizing instead of triggering any additional defensive measures. You said earlier you were not certain what those defensive measures might include. I still don't know exactly. He offered a faint, tired smile, but I know what they don't include now, which is enough for me at this particular moment. The hum beneath our feet had settled into something steadier, less like a groan of effort, and more like the quiet, confident rhythm of machinery that knew exactly what it was doing. Around us, the command deck continued brightening, screen after screen flickering through startup sequences, until the space that had greeted me in near total darkness 2 days earlier now glowed with the pale, steady light of a ship, remembering how to be a ship again. Then, without warning, a new sound joined the hum, low and resonant, carrying through the deck in a way that made the hair on my arms rise, despite the layers of my suit. It took me several seconds to recognize what I was hearing, and when I finally did, I felt something shift in my chest that I did not have adequate words for. It was a voice. Not human, not entirely, filtered through layers of degraded audio processing that gave it an eerie, hollow quality, but unmistakably a voice, speaking words, in a language I did not immediately recognize before the ship's own translation matrix caught up and rendered them into something I could understand. Systems recovery in progress, the voice said, steady and mechanical, carrying none of the warmth a human voice might have offered, and yet somehow still deeply affecting after 2 days of absolute silence. Unauthorized personnel not detected. Recovery pathway accepted. Continuing stabilization sequence. I stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the console as if it might offer some further explanation, some confirmation that what I had just heard was real, and not some hallucination born of exhaustion and adrenaline. Beside me, Hart had gone very still as well, though his expression held something closer to quiet vindication than shock. 2 days, he said softly, almost to himself. It's been running on almost nothing for 2 days, and it still recognized the pathway the moment someone actually offered it a way back. The comm crackled again, Doran's voice noticeably subdued now, the sharp command edge replaced by something closer to disbelief. Voss, Was that a voice? It was, I said, my own voice unsteady in a way I made no attempt to hide. The vessel is reporting active systems recovery. It has classified our presence as authorized. Whatever Hart did, Commander, it worked. Another long silence stretched across the comm, and when Doran finally spoke again, I could hear something in his voice I had never heard from him before, in 11 years of working under his command. Get back to the airlock, he said. Both of you. I want a full debrief the moment you are aboard the station, and I want Mr. Hart to explain, in detail, exactly what he just did, because I have 3 diagnostic AIs currently telling me this should be impossible, and I am looking at power readings that say otherwise. I glanced at Hart one final time before we began making our way back through the now brightly lit corridors, past systems humming quietly back to life, past a ship that 2 days earlier had felt like a tomb, and now felt, impossibly, like something closer to a patient, waking from a very long and very deliberate sleep. You knew this would work, I said as we walked. From the very beginning, before you ever stepped aboard, you believed this. I believed it was possible, he corrected gently. There's a difference between believing something is possible and knowing for certain it will happen. I've been wrong before, more times than I'd like to admit. This time, I wasn't. Why? I asked, and I realized as I said it that the question had been building in me since the moment he first spoke to Doran in the observation deck. Why did you care enough to ask for that hour, when 3 separate diagnostic systems had already told everyone else this ship was beyond saving? Hart was quiet for a long moment, our footsteps echoing through corridors that no longer felt abandoned, and when he finally answered, his voice carried the same worn, careful weight I had heard earlier, the sound of a man speaking from memory rather than theory. Because I've learned, the hard way, that irrecoverable is a word people use when they've stopped looking, rather than when there's genuinely nothing left to find, he said, and I've never been very good at accepting that word, not when there's still even the smallest chance it's wrong. We reached the airlock in silence after that, the ship humming steadily to life around us, and I found myself wondering, as the outer hatch finally hissed open to reveal the station beyond, exactly how many other things across Coalition space had been declared beyond saving, simply because no one had ever bothered to ask the question Hart had just answered. The debrief took place in Doran's office 2 hours later, after the medical team had confirmed neither of us had suffered any harm from our time aboard the Solace, and after Petra had spent nearly the entire interval running fresh scans on the ship, her earlier alarm replaced now by something closer to fascinated disbelief. I sat beside Hart across from Doran's desk, still faintly aware of the residual hum I imagined I could feel through the station floor, though I suspected by then it existed only in my memory. Walk me through it, Doran said, his hands folded in front of him, his expression carefully neutral in the way it only became when he was working hard to suppress a much stronger reaction underneath. From the beginning, I want to understand exactly what happened aboard that ship, and I want to understand why 3 independent diagnostic systems, each verified across 3 separate engineering guilds, produced a verdict that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. Hart leaned forward slightly, his hands resting loosely on his knees, the same patient calm he had carried throughout our hour aboard the Solace, now settling over him again. Your diagnostics weren't wrong, Commander, he said. Not exactly. They measured precisely what they were built to measure, and they measured it accurately. The problem isn't the accuracy of the tools, it's the assumption built into how they interpret what they find. Explain that assumption. Every diagnostic system I've ever encountered, across dozens of species and hundreds of ship designs, is built on the same basic premise. A system that reports no function is a system that has lost the ability to function. Hart glanced toward me briefly before continuing, as if checking whether I was following the same thread we had discussed hours earlier. That premise holds true almost universally. Damage causes failure, failure causes silence, and silence is read as death. It's a reasonable assumption, most of the time. But not this time. Not this time. Hart nodded. Human military vessels built for deep patrol and reconnaissance duty carry something most Coalition engineering doesn't account for, because most Coalition species haven't needed it in the same way we have. A deliberate, Deeply buried fail-safe protocol that mimics total systems failure, convincingly enough to fool nearly any external inspection, triggered automatically whenever the ship's own internal sensors detect conditions consistent with capture, boarding, or abandonment beyond any reasonable hope of rescue. Doran's expression shifted slightly, something between disbelief and dawning understanding. You are telling me this ship deliberately faked its own destruction. Not destruction, death. In the sense your diagnostics understand it, there's a difference. Hart's voice remained even, but I could hear something underneath it now, a kind of quiet conviction that suggested this was not simply professional knowledge to him, but something closer to personal understanding. A ship that's truly destroyed can't be salvaged, repaired, or turned against its own crew, by whoever finds it. A ship that only appears destroyed retains all of those possibilities, but only for someone who knows how to recognize the difference and ask the right question to prove it. Why would humans build such a thing? I asked, unable to hold the question back any longer. What circumstance makes an entire species decide their warships need to be capable of convincingly faking their own death? Hart was quiet for a moment, and when he answered, his voice had lost some of its earlier steadiness, replaced by something more careful, more measured. Humanity's history with conflict is longer and rougher than most coalition species realize, or care to ask about directly, he said. We learned early, and repeatedly, that an enemy who believes something is completely destroyed behaves very differently than an enemy who believes it might still be recoverable. Ships left for dead were sometimes left alone entirely. Ships that looked recoverable were sometimes stripped, studied, or worse, turned against the very people who built them. Over time, that lesson got built directly into our engineering philosophy. Better to look completely lost to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking for, and stay genuinely recoverable to anyone who does. That is an extraordinarily cautious design philosophy, Doran said slowly. It's a philosophy built from necessity, not caution for its own sake. Hart met his gaze steadily. We've spent a long time as a species learning not to trust the first verdict we're given, especially when that verdict is convenient for whoever delivered it. That distrust gets built into everything we design, our ships, our systems, even the way we train the people who operate them. Somewhere along the way, it became instinct rather than policy. You don't accept irrecoverable, not without checking for yourself first, because too many times in our history, accepting that verdict cost us something we couldn't get back. The room fell silent for a long moment, and I found myself thinking of the empty command chair aboard the Solace, turned slightly toward a terminal that someone had never finished working at. The crew, I said quietly. What happened to them? Hart's expression shifted, something heavier settling over his features. I don't know yet, he admitted. The ship's logs are still recovering, along with everything else. It's possible they evacuated before the failsafe triggered, using transport pods that wouldn't have registered on your scanners after this much time adrift. It's possible the failsafe activated because they were no longer in a position to prevent it, which would suggest a very different outcome. He paused. I'd rather not speculate further, until the ship itself can tell us. Doran leaned back in his chair, studying Hart with an expression I had rarely seen him wear, something between grudging respect and genuine unease. You said this pattern isn't unique to this particular vessel, he said. That you've seen it before, in other places. I have. Hart's answer was simple, offered without elaboration, though something in his tone suggested there was considerably more history behind those 3 words than he was willing to share in a formal debrief. Coalition salvage operations have been declaring human vessels irrecoverable for years, Commander. Sometimes correctly, sometimes not. Most of the time, nobody ever finds out which verdict was accurate, because nobody ever goes back to check. And you make a practice of going back to check. Someone has to. Hart's gaze moved briefly toward the window behind Doran's desk, toward the direction of the docking bay where the Solace now sat humming quietly with restored power, its running lights finally settling into a steady, coherent pattern, rather than the erratic flickering that had first drawn every eye on the station. Every ship your crews strip for parts without checking first is a ship that might have had a crew still waiting somewhere, for someone to come looking. I'd rather spend an hour proving myself wrong than spend the rest of my life wondering if I let something be thrown away that didn't actually need to be. I felt something tighten in my chest at that, an emotion I did not have an immediate name for, something between admiration and quiet, uncomfortable shame at how easily my own station had prepared to strip this vessel down to nothing, without ever asking the question Hart had walked in and answered within a single hour. Doran seemed to be wrestling with something similar, his expression unreadable as he studied the reports Petra had compiled, page after page of readings, confirming what none of us had believed possible only hours earlier. "This changes things," he said finally, more to himself than to either of us. "If human vessels regularly carry this kind of failsafe, and our diagnostic systems have no reliable way of distinguishing it from genuine catastrophic failure, then every human wreck we have processed over the last several years deserves re-examination." "That would be my recommendation, yes," Hart said quietly. "And if we find others," Doran continued, his voice growing more troubled, "others that were already stripped, already broken down for parts, before anyone thought to check for exactly what you found today." "What does that mean?" Hart did not answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice carried a weight that settled uncomfortably over the entire room. "It means some of those crews may have been waiting for a rescue that never came," he said, "because everyone standing over them had already decided, based on the wrong kind of certainty, that there was nothing left worth saving." Nobody spoke for a long moment after that, the quiet stretching heavy between us, broken only by the faint hum of the station's own systems humming steadily around us, a sound that suddenly felt far more precious than it had that morning. I thought again of the empty chair aboard the Solace, and for the first time since stepping aboard that silent, scorched ship 2 days earlier, I allowed myself to hope that somewhere, in logs still slowly recovering deep within its restored systems, we might find an answer that did not end in loss. Word of the Solace traveled faster than any of us expected. Within a week, the report Doran filed with Coalition Central Command had been forwarded to every major salvage authority across 3 sectors, along with Petra's detailed readings and my own account of the hour we spent aboard a ship that had, by every official measure, already been dead. I do not know exactly how the story spread beyond those formal channels, but spread it did, station to station, engineer to engineer, until it stopped being an internal incident report and became something closer to legend, told and retold, with details that grew stranger and more dramatic with each retelling. A ship every diagnostic system had condemned, brought back with a single wire. The phrase attached itself to the story the way certain phrases do, simple enough to repeat easily, strange enough to make people pause and ask for the full account. Hart stayed aboard our station for another 3 days, after the Solace fully stabilized, working quietly alongside Petra and myself, as the ship's recovering systems slowly revealed what had actually happened to it. The logs, once fully restored, told a story that none of us had been prepared for. The crew had not perished in whatever battle left those long, claw-like burns along the hull. They had evacuated deliberately, in an organized retreat, once it became clear their vessel could not outrun whatever had been pursuing them. The failsafe had triggered exactly as designed, transforming a warship that could no longer protect its crew into something that appeared, to any outside observer, entirely beyond saving. The transport pod locator beacon, buried deep in the recovered logs, gave us a heading. Doran dispatched a search vessel within the day. I was not present when they found the crew, adrift but alive in stasis pods designed for exactly this kind of extended wait. But Petra told me later that the moment their status confirmed on station monitors, half the engineering deck had gone quiet in a way she had never experienced before, not from fear this time, but from something closer to disbelief that a story which began with the word irrecoverable had ended, instead, with survival. I found Hart in the observation deck the evening before he left, standing in nearly the same spot where I had first seen him, looking out at the Solace one final time before it departed under its own restored power toward a proper repair facility. "You were right," I said, coming to stand beside him. "About all of it. I got lucky," he said, though there was no false modesty in the way he said it, simply an honest acknowledgement of the uncertainty that had accompanied every step of what we had done together. The pattern held this time. It doesn't always. How many times has it not held? He was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the ship beyond the glass. "Enough times that I don't like thinking about it too closely," he admitted, "but enough times that it did hold, too, that I've stopped being able to walk away from a wreck without at least asking the question first. I thought about the weeks and months ahead, about the re-examination Doran had already ordered across every human vessel our station had processed in recent years, about the uncomfortable, necessary work of returning to wrecks we had already stripped down, searching for any sign that we had made the same mistake before Hart ever arrived to correct it the first time. "What happens now?" I asked. "For you, I mean. Do you simply move on to the next station, the next wreck someone else has already given up on?" "Something like that." A faint smile crossed his face, tired but genuine. "There are more out there than you'd think. More than most people want to admit, honestly, because admitting it means admitting how many verdicts we've trusted, without ever actually checking whether they were true. That sounds like an exhausting way to live." "Sometimes it is." He turned to look at me fully then, something thoughtful in his expression. "But I've found it's a lot more exhausting to imagine all the ones I might have walked past, if I'd let myself believe the first answer every single time." We stood together in silence for a while longer, watching the Solace drift slowly away from the dock, its running lights steady now, coherent, nothing at all like the desperate flickering that had first drawn every eye on the station days earlier. I found myself wondering, as I watched it go, how many other ships across Coalition space carried the same quiet, stubborn defiance buried somewhere beneath systems that looked, to any ordinary inspection, entirely and permanently dead. I did not have to wonder for very long. Within the following months, reports began arriving from stations across 3 sectors, each one eerily similar in shape. Human contractors, sometimes alone, sometimes in small quiet teams, requesting brief access to wrecks long since classified beyond recovery, working with nothing more than basic tools and an unwillingness to accept the verdicts written into official records. Some of those requests turned up nothing, exactly as Hart had warned me they sometimes would, confirming that the original diagnosis had been accurate after all. But enough of them did not. Enough ships flickered back to life, under careful, patient hands, that the pattern became impossible to ignore. Coalition engineering guilds, proud institutions built on 4 centuries of accumulated certainty, found themselves forced into an uncomfortable reckoning. Diagnostic protocols that had gone unquestioned for generations were quietly revised, updated to account for a possibility none of their original designers had ever considered, that a system reporting total failure might, in certain specific circumstances, be lying on purpose, waiting patiently for someone who knew exactly which question to ask. I stayed on at the station for 2 more years after the Solace departed, and in that time, I watched the word irrecoverable slowly lose the absolute certainty it had once carried across every salvage operation I was part of. Every new wreck that arrived brought with it a small, persistent question that had not existed in my training before Hart walked into our observation deck, with no rank and a single coil of wire. Not simply, "Is this ship dead?" but also, "Is it silent because it has nothing left to give, or because it is waiting for someone patient enough and stubborn enough to prove otherwise?" I think of that question often now, even in circumstances that have nothing to do with salvage or wrecks or scorched hull plating. I think of it when I hear other species discuss humanity in the hushed, wary tones reserved for something not fully understood, something that seems, on the surface, ordinary and unremarkable, right up until the moment it proves itself to be anything but. The galaxy had learned to fear humans for many reasons over the years. Their weapons, their unpredictability, the strange, stubborn resilience that seemed to run through every story anyone told about them. But standing on that observation deck, watching a warship everyone else had already buried drift away under its own restored power, I understood something the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to grasp for itself. It was never really about the weapons at all. It was about a species that had learned, through hard and repeated experience, never to trust the comfortable certainty of a final verdict, not when there remained even the smallest chance that something declared beyond saving was simply waiting, quiet and patient, for someone willing to try one more wire before walking away for good. And somewhere out there, across every sector of Coalition space, drifting silently among wrecks long since abandoned and forgotten, I suspect there are still countless things waiting for exactly that kind of visitor to arrive.